Part 3. As Zayusu examined the village of the Dragon Tusk tribe which lay before his eyes, a pile of vegetation thrust itself forward from beside his head. Needless to say, that mass of leaves was actually Crush. She reached out to pull away the vegetation covering her face, which Zayusu felt was very beautiful. Are you really going to charge right in? Do you want to pick a fight with them? No, it's the exact opposite, actually. The Dragon Tusk tribe places great value on strength. If I left Ro behind and went in on foot, I might end up being challenged by all sorts of people before I even got to their chief. Entering while on Ro's back will avoid that sort of trouble. After advancing with Ro for some distance, it would seem they had been spotted, because several warriors emerged from the village, each brandishing a weapon and eyeing Zayusu and his group. Ro sensed their hostility and let out a low growl. As he heard Ro's growl of warning, he urged it forward. Continuing on like this would spark a confrontation. Zayusu went on until conflict was almost inevitable before stopping Ro and hopping down from it. Crush jumped down as well. Quite a number of warriors stared daggers at the two of them. Their gazes seemed to inflict a palpable pressure. This was no longer mere hostility, but on the level of murderous intent. Crush seemed shaken by their gazes and froze. That was because she was not experienced with the battlefield, despite her potent abilities as a druid. In contrast to her, Zayusu strode forth. He shielded Crush with his body and shouted, "I am Zayusu Shasha, or representative who has come to visit. I seek an audience with your chief." His powerful voice blew away the bloodlust in the air. The tables were turned on the warriors of the Dragon Tusk, who flinched as they were shaken by him. Then, Crush raised her voice and stated her name. "I am Crush Lu, acting chief of the Red Eye tribe. I too seek an audience with your chief." Though her voice was not loud, it was filled with the assurance and confidence of one who bore the fate of her tribe on her shoulders. Spurred on by the manly and proud voice of the male beside her, the cowering girl from just now was nowhere to be seen. "I say again, I am here to see the chief. Where is he?" In that moment a ripple ran through the air. It was as though raw emotion had been transformed into a shockwave which washed over them. Ro's head thrashed wildly. Its jaws gaped and it gave voice to a menacing roar, glaring angrily around itself. As the Hydra's roaring echoed from all around, the air seemed to shrink away from it, as though in fear. "There's no need to protect me from small things like this. I didn't do it to protect you, because you chose to come here of your own free will. However, I was the one who destroyed their tribe, so I should be the one to bear their vengeful gazes." The warriors started gathering at the entrance of the village. All of them were heavily muscled and imposing lizard men. Their bodies were covered in faded scars, which implied that they were grizzled veterans. However, Zayusu did not see their chief among them. All of these lizard men were mere warriors. None of them had the fearsome stature of his brother, nor did any of them have anything like Prusha's unusual looks or her air of authority. As Ro roared, the lizard men remained on edge. And then, NGK. Crush gulped and squeaked. However, Zayusu had already sensed the arrival of another lizardman and remained unmoved. That was because he had already sensed the slow approach of a mighty being even before it had made its appearance. Still, he could not help but stare at the lizardman before him. Simply put, that lizardman was a monster. Facing him was a gigantic male lizardman who was in excess of 230 centimeters in height. That alone would not have qualified him as monstrous, but that was not the only reason it was described as such. For starters, his right arm was extremely large and bizarre in appearance, like the oversized claw of a fiddler crab. No, his left arm was hardly slender, being about the same as Zayusu's. It was merely his right arm which was abnormally thick, and it had not become that way because of a mutation or disease, but simply because of sheer muscle mass. The ring finger and little finger were missing from his left hand. A scar continued back from the edge of his mouth, possibly caused by some sort of injury. His tail was flat, like it had been squashed. It resembled an alligator's more than a lizardman's. However, out of all these visual features, the thing which drew the most attention was the brand on his chest. The design was different from the one Zayusu had on his chest, but the meaning was the same. This lizardman was also a traveler. And as he sized up Zayusu and company, the rustle of dry kindling spilled from his mouth, the sound of that monstrous lizardman grinding his teeth. It was probably his version of laughter. "Welcome, Master of Frost Pain." The monstrous lizardman's rich basso profundo voice matched his appearance perfectly. He was probably speaking normally, but even that exuded an awesome air of power. "Pleased to meet you. I am the Greenclaw Tribe's Zuru." The monster lizardman waved off the rest of his introduction. "State your names." "I am Zayusu Shasha, and this is Crush Lu." "That wouldn't be a plant monster?" "No, since you've brought a Hydra along, it stands to reason that you'd have another creature by your side. Hardly anything to be worried about." "Not quite." The monstrous lizardman once again waved off Crush, who was taking off her costume of leaves. "Hey, it was just a joke. Don't take everything I say so seriously, it's a pain." After glancing at Crush as she doffed her pile of leaves, he looked back to Zayusu. "So, why are you here? Before that, might I know your name?" "Oh, I'm the chief of the Dragon Tusk tribe, Zenberogu." "Zenberu will do." Zenberu laughed in his tooth-grinding way. While this was exactly what he had expected, the idea of a traveler becoming chief was still quite surprising. On the other hand, it was an answer he could accept. A lizardman like him was no mere traveler. In truth, the gathering hostility had vanished the moment he showed up. Clearly, he was a lizardman with great authority, as well as extraordinary martial might and leadership. "Zayusu will be fine, then. Tell me, Zenberu, have any strange monsters visited your village recently? That messenger of the Supreme One or whatnot? Well, if they came, then we can discuss." Zenberu raised his hand to interrupt Zayusu. "I think I know what you want to say. However, we only listen to the strong. Draw your sword." The towering lizardman before him, Zenberogu of the Dragon Tusk tribe, bared his fangs in a toothy grin. "What?" As Crush gasped, she saw approving looks on the faces of Zayusu and the surrounding warriors. "Well, that makes things simple, Chief of the Dragon Tusk. It certainly saves a lot of time. You're a truly outstanding messenger." "No, as the Master of Frost Pain, perhaps I should say that it was only to be expected. Choosing the strong as their leaders was a very rational decision for the lizard men. However, was it really such a good idea when it involved the continued survival of their tribes? Should they not discuss it with the others and consider the matter from various angles before coming to a conclusion?" Those thoughts ran through Crush's head, followed by surprise that she would actually think that way. The fact was that all the warriors watching them approved of their chief's decision, be they male or female. She would probably have felt the same way had she been asked the same thing earlier. Then, why am I questioning this now? Where had these doubts come from? Was it because of some kind of magical attack? That was impossible. She was confident that nobody in this swamp was her superior in terms of magic. That confidence made her absolutely certain that she had not been the victim of some sort of spell. Crush turned to look at the two of them. Zayusu and Zenberu. Standing next to each other, they looked like a child compared to an adult. One's physique did not determine everything. She was very clear about that as a magic caster. However, given the massive difference between their bodies, she could not help but hope that this was not the case. Hope? I'm hoping that he won't have to fight. Crush wanted to know why she was feeling such a bizarre thing. Why did she not want that? Why did she not want him to fight? There was only one answer for that, which went without saying. Crush smiled bitterly, as though to mock herself. You might as well admit it, Crush. You don't want Zayusu to fight because you're afraid he'll get hurt. That he'll die. That was the whole thing in a nutshell. It was rare for these battles to be fought to the death. However, the word rare implied that the possibility still existed. Lives could easily be lost if they fought until they were no longer in possession of their senses. As a female, she did not want her companion to die because he had taken part in this fight. In other words, Crush had long since accepted Zayusu's proposal within her heart. I gave in, sir, simply because no male ever. Does that mean I'm easily tricked? It just feels. I'm both happy and a little upset. What a pain. Having accepted her innermost feelings, Crush stepped up to Zayusu as he prepared for battle, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Do you need anything? Is anything lacking? No, I'm fine. Crush patted his shoulder. It was a strong shoulder. Ever since she had come of age, Crush had walked the path of the priest. She had touched the bodies of many males while she was praying, while she was applying medicine to them, and while she was casting spells on them. But her contact with Zayusu's body was longer than all those other times put together. So this is Zayusu's body. Huh? His firm muscles, filled with hot blood that was eager for battle and a palpable manliness. What's wrong? Zayusu was baffled by Crush's lingering hand. That. It was a prayer. A priest's prayer. I see. So your ancestor spirits watch over those of other tribes, then. The spirits of our tribe are not so petty. Good luck. Crush apologized internally to her ancestors as she peeled her hand off Zayusu's shoulders, because she had lied about praying to them for the victory of the male she favored. Zenburo was also preparing for battle. He carried a massive polearm in his right hand, a steel halberd that was almost 3 meters long. A regular lizardman would need both hands to wield it. And then he swung it lazily. The sweep of the halberd generated a gust of wind that swept over Crush, who was some distance away from him. Can you? No, I should ask, will you be all right about that? Well, I'll see how it goes. At first, Crush had wanted to ask if he could win, but ultimately, she did not. Zayusu must have fought while knowing that victory was not impossible. That would mean that the male before her would not lose. They had only known each other for a day and traveled with each other for half that time, but Crush was certain of that. She loved this male because there was something about him to love. Then, are you ready, Master of Frost? Zayusu. I'm fine. Whenever you're ready. With a dramatic flourish, Zayusu turned his back to Crush and stepped into the dueling circle. Crush sighed. That was because of the back, which could not help but draw her attention. The warmth of her hand, which had been touching his shoulder for so long, not very long, in actual fact slowly faded away. The battle which came next was essentially a simplified version of the tribal chief selection battle. Since this was intended to be a one-on-one fight, magical assistance from a third party was against the rules. However, the warmth on Zayusu's shoulder, which had made him feel nervous and jittery, and the contact with Crush made him wonder if she had worked some magic on him. However, there was no way that she, as the acting chief of her tribe, could not know of that rule. Then, why was he so fired up, even though she had not cast a spell? Was it because he wanted to do his best for her, as a male performing for his female? His big brother had once said that he was a withered tree, but that did not seem quite right. Zayusu entered the circle formed of lizard men, and swiftly drew Frostpain from his waist. The blade emanated a frosty white mist, as though in response to Zayusu's will. A disturbance swept through the surrounding lizard men. They were the survivors of the Razor Edge tribe. In other words, they had known the previous owner of Frostpain, and they understood its fearsome power. As he beheld the power of Frostpain, which only a true owner could unleash, Zenbaru's savage expression turned to one of glee. He bared his teeth and growled like a beast. In response to his opponent's fighting spirit, Zayusu only had a single, cold response. "I don't want to hurt you too badly." His taunt immediately incurred the ire of all the warriors around him. However, they immediately calmed down as the sound of an unnaturally loud splash echoed through the air. Zenbaru had driven the point of his halberd into the mushy ground. "Oh, then make me accept my defeat. Listen up, all of you. If I die in this fight, he will be your new chief. There will be no objections to that." The surrounding warriors did not agree right away, but neither did they protest. If Zayusu really did kill Zenbaru, they would obey him, however unwillingly. "Good. Now come at me with the readiness to die. I ought to be the strongest foe you've ever faced." "Indeed. I understand. Also, if I die by your hand." Zayusu glanced back to Crush. "It's fine. I'll let your female go back safely. She's not mine yet." "Kek, it seems you're really into that plant monster. Is she really such a good female?" "Very good." They paid no heed to said female, who was hugging her head and squatting on the ground. "Now that I'd like to see. Perhaps if I win, I'll strip her bare and see what she looks like before I let her go." Until now, Zayusu had only been filled with an intent to fight, but now that intent had developed another nuance. "It feels like you've given me an excellent reason to win. I won't let someone like you enjoy Crucia's bare body. You really are hopelessly in love with her, aren't you?" "Oh yes. There's no helping how much in love I am." Several other lizard women seemed to be talking to the squatting female, but she hurriedly shook her head. The two males put that matter out of mind for now. "Ha!" Zenbaru chortled in glee. "Then defeat me. If you die, none of that will matter anymore." "That was my intention." Zayusu and Zenbaru locked gazes. It would seem they had said everything that had to be said. "Here I come. Bring it on." The two of them exchanged terse words, but no blows. Just as the anticipation of the spectating lizard men built to its peak, Zayusu began inching forward. There was no sound, despite this being a waterlogged marsh. Zenbaru remained still, awaiting his foe. Before long, when Zayusu had reached a certain distance, a massive clang rang out from the air which Zayusu had just leapt away from. It was the sound of Zenbaru swinging his halberd. There was no skill to it. It was merely a forceful swing. However, it was so shocking precisely because of its artlessness. Zenbaru braced his halberd, took a stance, and prepared himself for Zayusu's next incursion. He wielded the massive halberd with just his right hand. Immediately after every cyclonic swing, he would immediately reset to a ready position. Zayusu felt something was strange. Therefore, to verify the meaning of that motion, he darted into his foe's attack range and was subjected to that hurricane-like swing. He blocked the haft of the weapon with Frostpain, but a bolt of intense pain racked the hand holding the sword, and he was bodily flung away. One could say that he had extraordinary arm strength if he could toss away a grown lizardman with just the might of one arm. Their blood was boiling. The surrounding warriors roared as they saw their chief display his matchless might. Zayusu's tail swished as he stumbled back, still on his feet. He shook his numbed hand, and narrowed his eyes. What's this? Zayusu's attention was focused on the hulking body before him. What's going on? This is too weak. Indeed, that was a swift blow, and if he blocked it with his sword he would be sent flying, but that was all. It was not terrifying in the least. Zenbaru's moves were like a child swinging around with a stick. There was no technique to speak of, only sheer brute strength. The question now was if that was really all he had. Someone with a huge arm like his ought to be able to wield his weapon more skillfully. Could it be that he's not using his full strength to lull me into overconfidence? Zayusu felt that it was not the case. He began to reconsider his strategy, watchful against the unusual feeling of not knowing the truth. The hitherto stationary Zenbaru smiled and asked, "What's the matter?" Not using Frost Pain's power. He was clearly taunting him with that smile, but Zayusu did not take Zenbaru's bait. "I was once beaten by the wielder of Frost Pain." Zayusu remembered. He knew the person of whom Zenbaru spoke, the former chief of the Razor Edge tribe, and also the one whose head Zayusu had taken. He relaxed the intense focus he had directed at Zenbaru, and set his sights wider. Among all those who bore hostility towards him, the ones who hated him most must be the survivors of the Razor Edge tribe. That's where the wounds on my left hand came from. Zenbaru waggled his left hand and its two missing fingers for emphasis. Maybe if you use the ability that guy used to beat me, you might be able to win. Really now? Zayusu replied in a cold, calm voice. Granted, that ability was very powerful. Because it could only be used 3 times a day, he had a good chance of victory if he used it. The reason why Zayusu had defeated the previous owner of Frost Pain was because his foe had already expended his 3 uses of the ability. If his foe had been able to use it back then, Zayusu might well have been the one to die instead. However, someone who knew of Frost Pain's power would not deliberately incite its wielder to make use of it. Zayusu remained on his guard. I have no idea. Still, there's no point dragging this out. Time to make my move. Having decided on his course of action, Zayusu charged forward, twice as fast as before. Zenbaru responded to Zayusu with shocking speed. Zayusu did not evade, but met the blow head-on with Frost Pain. Everyone who saw it felt that Zayusu would be swatted away once more. Zayusu met the halberd with Frost Pain and countered the attack. There was no need for martial arts or the like. Zenbaru's halberd swings were child's play. No matter how forcefully he swung, his blows could be easily dispersed. Zenbaru's eyes went wide in shock, no, in respect. At the same time, Zayusu dashed forward with lightning speed, faster than Zenbaru could bring the halberd back. Even with muscles like his, resetting his stance after a full power hit with his halberd would take time. That time was enough for Zayusu to close in. In the next moment, Frost Pain cut in at Zenbaru's body, and blood splattered. Thunderous cheering erupted from all around, as well as a whimper of pain. It was not Zenbaru who stumbled back, oozing fresh blood. It was Zayusu, with 2 bleeding wounds on his face. In contrast with what he had done until now, Zenbaru strode forward at Zayusu, intent on not letting him escape. He led the way with the weapon that had wounded Zayusu. That weapon was his claws. They collided with Frost Pain, and the ringing of metal peeled forth. The halberd splashed as Zenbaru let go of it. Goo! Zenbaru exhaled, and as he stepped forward, his massive arm launched into a flurry of blows. Compared to his amateurish spear play from earlier, his bare-handed chops were on the level of a master. Now that the most important piece of the puzzle had been revealed, it all came together for Zayusu. Zenbaru was not a warrior, but a monk. One who used the power of ki to turn his body into a living weapon. Zayusu blocked his chops with Frostpain. Lizardman claws were sharper and harder than human nails, but even they would not make metallic sounds like this. Indeed, this was a monk ability called Iron Natural Weapon, which hardened one's natural weaponry, such as claws or teeth. It was said that the fists of the most skilled monks could even break adamantite, the hardest metal known. However, judging by the sensation which filtered back through Frostpain, Zenbeiru had not yet reached that level. He was only on par with steel. Even so, his hardened claws could stand on even terms with Frostpain, one of the four treasures, so he could not look down on it. The two of them exchanged blow after blow. Zenbeiru swiped with his chops while Zayusu swung with Frostpain. They leapt away to avoid each other's strikes, opening up the distance between them. "Ha, so you're still alive." Zenbeiru licked at the flesh and blood starring his fingertips. Zayusu extended that tongue of his that was longer than a human's, and licked at the red fluid that flowed from the place which corresponded to the cheek on a human being. He was glad that he had managed to evade the knife hand thrust that had been intended to gouge out his eyes. He was wounded, but not deeply, and he could continue fighting. He thanked his tribe's spirits for protecting him, and maybe I evaded it because the ancestors of Crucia's tribe protected me. Zayusu was grateful, but Zenbeiru was grumbling instead. Come to think of it, if I beat you without making you use that move, it'll feel like you're going easy on me. Zenbeiru clenched his fists and pounded his chest several times. Sorry, but I don't intend to use that move. Oh. Then don't say you didn't go all out after you lose. Do you think I'm someone who'd say that, after fighting me? No, I don't. Forgive me, I misspoke. Just, if you're not using that move, then here I come. With a whoosh, Zenbeiru's leg cleaved through the air at Zayusu. There was no hesitation in that movement. Zayusu slashed at Zenbeiru's leg with Frostpain while evading the kick, but a metallic clang rang out, and the strike bounced off. Zayusu's eyes went wide. When a sword met flesh, the flesh should have been wounded. That was the way of the world. Yet, a monk's ki turned that precept on its head. This was the result of iron skin. That skill could shroud the body in ki before any attack could touch it, making it as tough as steel. Much like Iron Natural Weapon, the more skilled one was, the harder it would become. The fact that his opponent had repelled a magic sword with his bare flesh spoke volumes about his monk's skills. However, Zayusu still felt that he had a chance of victory. It was not that there was an overwhelming difference between their combat skills. It was only that the circumstances had been against Zenbeiru from the start. He came with a bewildering series of strikes. Flying kick, tail sweep, straight punch, knife hand. He attacked with all these and more. Every blow Zenbeiru struck was both fast and weighty. All Zayusu could do against a foe like that was adopt a total defense. Combination followed combination. If he did not defend against his foe's destructive strikes, Zayusu's defeat was assured. Confident in their chief's victory, the surrounding lizard men cheered as Zenbeiru lashed out with blow after blow. Zenbeiru's claws occasionally grazed Zayusu, easily scoring his scale-sheathed body and leaving wounds which wept blood in their wake. Those injuries could not be considered light in any sense. Zayusu's body was covered in those wounds. His life hung in the balance, and it would not be strange if he surrendered at any time. The joyful looks on the spectating lizard men's faces only proved it as they prepared to celebrate their chief's imminent victory. However, that was not the case for Zenbeiru. Every time his strikes were blocked, Zenbeiru felt victory slipping further and further away from his grasp, and it made him anxious. Frostpain was imbued with cold, and it inflicted additional cold damage whenever it wounded a foe. A side effect of that was that it dealt cold damage to anyone who touched the weapon. In other words, just touching the weapon was enough to slowly wear away at Zenbaru's body with its cold damage. His hands were freezing, his legs were numb, and his movements were slowing down. Damn it, I lost too quickly in the previous fight. So I didn't know it had a power like this too. So it didn't just have that move alone. That's one of the 4 treasures for you. Zayusu had adopted a defensive stance because he knew the item had an effect like this. Or rather, he had done so because he knew it was an assured way to deal damage. That was probably why he had not dodged Zenbaru's attacks. He had chosen a steady path to victory. This lack of openings made him Zenbaru's greatest enemy right now. Zenbaru used his trump card on Zayusu, who was rushing in. If he managed to block that move as well, Zenbaru's chances of victory would be slim at best. He felt like he was charging an impregnable fortress alone. Ah, damn it, can't I beat him? But I've waited too long for this. His battle with that lizardman from the past flashed through his mind. He was stronger now than he was then, and he had trained non-stop in order to attain victory. Even when he heard that the person who had defeated him had been killed, he might have felt regret, but he never stopped trying. He had been waiting for this day. As chief, he could not abandon everything to indulge in battle, so he had been delighted when he heard that the bearer of Frost Pain had come to his village. He could not let this long-awaited battle end like this. Zenbaru began losing the feeling in his punches and kicks, and his ki could no longer reach his limbs. Still, he kept attacking. He's strong, stronger than that guy from last time. Just like he had honed himself ceaselessly, the lizardman before him must have trained himself without slacking off until now. While he could have said that he could not narrow the gap between them because of Frost Pain, he had no desire to spout quitter talk like that. Amazing. He truly is the master of Frost Pain. The mightiest lizardman ever. Zenbaru did not halt his combination attacks, even as he praised Zayusu, who was blocking his strikes with Frost Pain. Wounds, blood, and more wounds. Crush had devoted all her attention to witnessing this intense back-and-forth struggle, and with her outstanding druid skills, she had already seen how the battle would end. Incredible. He must have predicted all this when the battle started. Crush was in awe of Zayusu's outstanding warrior skills. The cheers continued from all around. They were cheering for Zenbaru, who was attacking non-stop and seemed to have the upper hand. None of them realized that Zenbaru's limbs were gradually growing sluggish. Zayusu was very strong. Crush was certain of that. Almost all lizard men did battle with their bodies and brute strength, but Zayusu and Zenbaru fought with skill, and Frost Pain aided that fighting skill. Therefore, Frost Pain was a major factor in the development of the present situation of the gulf between them. However, it was not the sole reason for it. If one gave Frost Pain to an ordinary warrior, could they fight with Zenbaru like this? The answer was no. Zenbaru was not some 2-bit mook. The weapon was powerful, but the fact that Zayusu could exploit it to its full potential because he was a first-rate warrior. But more outstanding than that was his perceptive and analytical mind. Zayusu had evaded the strike when Zenbaru had cast down his halberd because he had been on top of the situation and had been closely observing it. He had sensed the presence of his foe's ace in the hole and that the halberd was a mere distraction. When he went on that journey as a branded traveler, what else had he brought back with him besides the knowledge of fish rearing and these battle techniques? Before she knew it, Crush had become certain of Zayusu's victory. Now, she merely watched the profile of his face, her heart pounding in what was no longer anxiety. He really is an impressive specimen of a male. Time seemed to fly past for those watching this exciting battle, but the two participants felt otherwise. The toll on their bodies and spirits caused by their panting was more intense than the passage of time. Despite being covered in blood, Zhao Yusu's fighting spirit was still strong. For that, the surrounding lizard men congratulated him. After all, nobody else had lasted this long against their chief before. And then, just as Zenbero seemed on the verge of claiming victory, he dropped out of his fighting stance. The audience waited with bated breath. Zenbero ought to be declaring his victory anytime soon. However, the opposite happened. I've lost. But their chief should have been the winner. Even so, why had he announced his defeat? Only Crush had foreseen this. She raced into the fighting ring. Are you alright? As he heard those words, Zhao Yusu exhaled and lowered the sword in his hand. In a very tired voice, he replied, "It's nothing fatal. I should be able to fight in the upcoming battle. In any case, I'll use healing magic on you." Crucia's grass costume rustled, and she poked her head out. Zhao Yusu felt a comfortable warmth suffusing his wounds, different from the searing heat that had made them. As he luxuriated in the sensation of vitality flowing back into his body, he turned to look at the gigantic lizardman with whom he had just fought a life-and-death struggle. Zenbero was surrounded by his tribe mates. He was explaining the situation to them, and the strategies Yusu was using. WuxaWorldAudio.com. That'll do it. Crush declared that his treatment was complete after casting 2 spells on him, and Zhao Yusu looked down on his body. While the clotted blood still stuck to his skin, the injuries beneath had completely recovered. There was a certain tension over the former wounds when he shifted his body, but at least they did not look like they would open up. "Thank you. You're welcome." Crush smiled brightly, and the pearly teeth she exposed were very pretty. "You're beautiful." "What?" Her tail swished, and splashed against the water. The two of them gazed silently at each other. Crush's silence was because she had no idea why this male would casually mention something like that. She was not used to such compliments, so hearing Zhao Yusu say things like that was not good for her heart. Meanwhile, Zhao Yusu had no idea why Crush was being quiet. Did I do something wrong? Thoughts like that ran through his mind. The fact was that he had little experience with females, so he had no idea what he should do. Zhao Yusu was surprisingly tense as well. Just as the awkwardness between them reached its height, a voice saved them. "Oi oi, are you trying to make me jealous, you bastard?" The two of them looked to the source of the voice, to Zenbero. Their simultaneous and identical reactions left Zenbero momentarily speechless. Oi, Whitey, how about some healing over here?" Zenbero seemed quite nonchalant about Crush's albinism. However, Crush recalled the Zenbero's branded body and realized why he reacted that way. Fine. But shouldn't you let the priests of your tribe heal you?" It doesn't matter. Enough talk, it really hurts. Feels like even my bones are frozen. Could you hurry it up a little? Just remember to tell your priests that you were the one who asked me to do it. It's fine, I'll say I forced you into it, as a request. Crush sighed, and worked her healing magic. Zhao Yusu noticed that the hostile glares around him had diminished somewhat, and that there were a few friendly eyes looking upon him. All right, it's done. Crush had cast more healing spells on Zenbero than on Zhao Yusu. That implied that his injuries were not external, but internal. "Oh, you're better than our priests." "Thank you. Still, I don't usually heal members of other." "Never mind. Thank you for your kind words. Now then, since we're both healed, why don't we talk about the main topic? Might be a bit of a rush, but you don't mind, right?" "Oh, then let's hear it, although I wanted to say that." Zenbero stopped mid-sentence and then smiled. "But first, let's drink." Zayusu and Crush had no idea what those words meant, and their faces were equally confused. Troublesome business should be discussed over wine. You know that, right? Zayusu understood the meaning of the life and death duel. After all, it proved their respective strength, which was useful in negotiation. It was the lizardman way of life. Drinking parties, on the other hand, were alien to him, because the Greenclaw tribe had no such practice. People who went drinking right after fighting for their lives seemed terribly sad to him. I don't get it. The strength drained from Zayusu's body and his face was one of the frank surprise as he muttered his response. However, it was immediately drowned out by a surging wave of regret in his heart, regret for behaving so childishly in front of a chief with whom he had not even allied with yet. In fact, he felt Crush looking at him with a strange expression in her eyes. Zayusu had no experience with love, so he had no idea Crush had been studying him all this time. He was seeing a new side of his beloved, and he found it both curious and adorable. No, I mean, if we drink a lot, our heads won't be clear, which would be troublesome for us. Zayusu hurriedly tried to amend his words, but Zenberu brushed it aside with his reply. Oi oi oi, you're a traveler, aren't you? Don't they say that if you want to learn something, go to the dwarves? No, I didn't learn from the dwarves, but from the people of the forest. Really? Then all you need to know is this lesson of the dwarves: friends who drink together become firm friends. Maybe we won't have much time together, but we ought to discuss things frankly and openly. Shouldn't we, Zayusu Shasha? I see. Yes, I understand, Zenberogu. Good. Come on, everyone. Time to drink. Bring it over. Get everything ready. The pile of logs resting upon the ground stood nearly 2 meters tall, and the crimson flames upon it burned fiercely, as though they were reaching to the sky. This massive red blaze chased away the dark of the night. Near the log pile was a large vessel that was over 1 meter tall and about 80 centimeters wide. A fermented scent wafted out from it. Several dozen lizard men took turns scooping out liquid from the vessel. However, the wine within did not seem to deplete. This was one of the 4 treasures that was ranked alongside Zayusu's Frostpain, the Great Wine Cask. While it could produce an infinite supply of wine, the taste was passable at best, and anyone who knew their wine would turn their noses up at it. However, it was delicious nectar to the lizard men. Therefore, the guests kept coming. There was a quiet region some distance away from the wine cask. The reason why this place was quiet was simple enough: because it was littered with the bodies of many drunken lizard men, who lay insensate here. All the lizard men who had gotten so drunk that they had passed out were dumped here. Having shed her leafy costume, Crush, carefully taking care not to step on the tails of the fallen lizard men, made her way to this place, paying close attention to the ground. Her footsteps were even, so she looked like she was still sober, but it was hard to say that she was not drunk. Her tail seemed like it had a life of its own, energetically flexing here and there. Sometimes it curled, sometimes it stood straight, and sometimes it drooped. It behaved like an excited child. The fact was that Crush felt something like a cool wind coursing through her soul. While part of that was because of the wine, that was not the sole reason. The liberated feeling of her body had also contributed to it. This was the first time she had shown her albinized body to so many people. However, their leader was a monster in his own right, so while the people around her had been startled at first, she soon blended in with them. With both hands full of food, a bliss-filled Crush continued forward. She reached the place where Zayusu and Zenberu were sitting on the ground and hoisting a glass to each other. Said glasses seemed to have been made using coconut shells, and the liquid within was transparent, but it emanated a thick fermented smell. Crush laid a pair of raw fish in front of the two of them, snacks to go with the drinks. Zenberu smiled and greeted Crush. "Yo, plant monster. Could you not call me that?" She had already shared her costume, so why did he insist on calling her that? It would seem he planned to amuse himself in that way. Once she realized it, Crush decided to cease her pointless resistance. "Have you finished your discussions?" Zayusu and Zenberu looked at each other, and nodded. For the most part, the two of them wanted to speak in private, so they asked Crush to leave them be. Since they had said as much, all she could do was leave and bring some food over, but within her heart, she was hoping to be part of their conversation. After all, if they were discussing the upcoming battle, then she was certainly involved in it. She was hoping to be allowed to skim the essentials, even if she could not listen in on the inconvenient parts. This is a conversation between males. But Zenberu shut her down with those cold words. Crush expressed her displeasure on her face, but she had no choice but to change the topic. "So, what do you plan to do? Fight shoulder to shoulder as allies?" "Wah. Oh, as if you had to ask. Of course we're going to fight. Or rather, even if you didn't come, we'd be fighting anyway." A sound like sticks scraping against each other came from Zenberu's maw. "You really are a battle maniac. Or, don't praise me like that, now I'm all embarrassed." Zenberu paid no heed to Crush as she rolled her eyes, but made a request of her. "Oh right, help me talk some sense into him, plant monster. No matter how I ask him, Zayusu won't accept the position of our chief." There was a weary, despondent look on Zayusu's face. Judging by the fatigue there, Crush could tell that he had repeated his answer many times in her absence. He can't accept that position. After all, you're from different tribes, and he's a... Crush was about to say, "He's a traveler," but then she considered that Zenberu was also a traveler, and decided to change the topic. "So why did you become a traveler, anyway?" "What? Oh, after I lost to Frostpane's previous owner, I was devastated, and wanted to become stronger. That being the case, why not leave this place and go somewhere else? That was why I became a traveler." Beside him, Zayusu rounded his shoulders in powerlessness. It was then that Crush recalled what Zayusu had told him about his own travels. In the past, when he had left on his journey, the only thing keeping him going was his determination, resolve, and his sense of duty towards his tribe. Zenberu, as a fellow traveler, ought to have felt the same way. But right now, he could not sense any of that from him. Crush placed a gentle hand on Zayusu's shoulder, as if to say, "He's him, and you're you." At this moment, anyone observing him would probably conclude that they were lovers. As she realized this, Crush's tail curled up, while Zayusu's tail swished back and forth. The two of them gazed at each other, and smiled shyly. Zenberu pretended that he had seen none of that and continued. "I thought there must be someone pretty strong inside that mountain, given how big it was. So during my travels, I met the dwarves and learned a lot of things from them. Got that halberd from them too. I didn't want it at first, but since they asked me to keep it as a memento of our meeting, I had to hang on to it. So that happened." "That's nice." Crush's answer seemed a little slapdash, or rather, somewhat cold. "Oh, thanks." Sarcasm did not work on him either. Now that the good mood in the air had been ruined, Crush picked up her wine and downed it in one gulp. She felt it burn as it went down her throat, and the heat seemed to radiate from her stomach throughout her entire body. Zayusu polished off his wine in one go as well. Just then, a quiet question made its way through the air. It seemed completely different from the voice just now, and for a moment it made him wonder who had asked it. "Say, do you think we can win?" Zayusu quietly replied. I have no idea. Same here. After all, there's no such thing as a battle where victory is assured. If someone actually there brag about how he'd win despite not knowing his enemy's strength, I'd beat the crap out of him to shut him up. Crush had no response to Zenbaru as he chuckled. Still, our foe's gotten a little careless. The changes here ought to affect our chances of victory. In place of Zayusu, Crush looked at Zenbaru with a puzzled look on her face. Could you recall what that monster said? Sorry, I was sleeping then. Surely you must have heard of it from someone else. I couldn't be bothered to remember something like that, so I forgot it. In any case, the important thing is that if they come looking for a fight, then we're going to give them one. There's no hope for this guy. Crush decided to abandon her attempts at explanation with that. Zayusu grinned wryly, and answered. He told us to struggle with all our might. A dangerous expression came over Zenbaru's face, and his features twisted savagely. Well, that just pisses me off. To think they're sneering at us from the beginning. Zenbaru roared with frightful anger. The cry carried with it his wrath and displeasure. That's right, they're turning their noses up at us. The fact they're so arrogant probably suggests they're powerful enough to break our resistance easily. But we're going to crush their self-assurance. We're going to gather the 5 tribes and show them our full power. I want to beat back their assault and show them that we're a force to be reckoned with. Well put. I can understand that. I like it. Just as the 2 males were eagerly discussing their battle plans, Crush rained on their parade. I doubt there's much merit to wounding their pride. All we need to do is prove our worth to them, right? Perhaps if they know that, they won't exterminate us. Oi, are you telling me to bow to annoying people like that? Zayusu. I know fleeing is dangerous, but I think it's better to live on, even in bondage. Crush quietly said. The other 2 did not deny her or tease her for her slave mentality. It was not that they wanted to be ruled, but being slaves had more of a future than being corpses. As long as there was a future, there was infinite possibility. For instance, they could teach the method of fish farming to everyone, and that might allow them to abandon their homes and flee elsewhere. Any leader who abandoned that possibility and ordered everyone to die was not worthy of his position. Now, listen closely, you all. As they heard Zayusu's calm voice, the 3 of them pricked up their ears, and they heard the sounds of mirth coming from the party. After we're ruled, we might not be able to laugh and rejoice like this. The operative word being might, right? Really? I don't think so. I don't think anyone who would take pleasure in watching us die would be so compassionate. After all, if there was any mercy in their hearts, they would not plan to exterminate us in such a playful manner. Crush nodded. But even so, still, what I want to say is, please don't die. I won't. Not before I hear your answer. Crush and Zayusu exchanged passionate looks under the night sky. And then, they made their vow. Paying no attention to Zenbaru, the bored outsider, end chapter.